want to do today is my version of Peter Pan, and I have done quite a few before. I have played him on stage a number of times, and they've always been ever so slightly different. I cosplay him quite regularly, I do commissions and stuff, so you guys have seen my sort of general Peter Pan, the Peter Pan how he's instantly sort of recognisable, like, yes, that's Peter Pan, no question about it. But what I am going to talk about in the voiceover and the makeup I'm going to do is actually the way I have imagined Peter Pan since I was a kid. Now, anyone who's paid any attention to this channel whatsoever, or me in general, will know that I am a ridiculous Peter Pan nerd. I have been pretty much into the story and the character and the backstory and the lore, and I've looked up so much about it. I've read like The Little White Bird and Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens, and I've read the biographies of J.M. Barrie's life, and I've looked into it just so much. I did my dissertation on Peter Pan and like the philosophy behind it and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff that I know. There's a lot of stuff that I enjoy looking into and learning more about, but there is quite a lot that I do know, and that's not bragging, that is just I have spent a lot of time on this hobby. It was basically my hobby pre-becoming a drama kid and pre-learning I enjoyed sewing stuff, so it's been around for a while. But my imagining of Peter Pan and how he looks has been pretty solid since I was a kid. Now, I will do a whole other video on this one day, but I have mentioned in some other videos, particularly on TikTok, that I, as a kid as well, didn't really enjoy the Disney version because they mucked up too many things, and they sort of simplified the story and also changed it for reasons I will go into in another video. But essentially, the Disney version of Peter Pan has never been my version of Peter Pan. I do not imagine Peter Pan as a small ginger white boy. Now, Peter Pan was created and written by J.M. Barrie, who is a Scottish white author, so how he imagined him, we may never completely know because his descriptions have always been fairly vague. There is a sort of etherealness to Peter, which I always caught onto as a kid, and I really like things like the stage direction he added in for Jean Forbes Robertson, the most unearthly of the Peter Pans, where Peter never touches anyone and never makes physical contact with anybody. And as a kid, that was the piece of Peter that I really liked. I liked his complete just detachment and unavailability. He is completely, there's like a veil between him and everything else, and he was this ethereal sort of spirit. So I'm going to be doing my makeup to look as close as I can to the Peter Pan that I have always imagined. When I had tree branches of the wind knocking against my window as a kid and an adult, who do I imagine is outside calling for me to come to the Neverland? Well, this is what he looks like. And so I'm going to attempt to replicate this via some makeup. We will see how this goes. If it goes terribly, then no one will ever see this video. So if you are seeing it, then it must have gone reasonably okay. Alright, wish me luck, and here we go. I'm going to warn you at the beginning of this video that the next couple of weeks on this channel, for Monday Madness, I am going to be doing Peter Pan content exclusively. This is because I'm on a Peter Pan kick right now, and I've had ideas, finally, so I am going to do my Hook the Movie video, where I talk about what was wrong with it, what I personally found wrong with it, and how I think they should have made it better. If that isn't your thing, then I completely understand, and I will see you in whatever Monday Madness video you decide to come back and join us in. But for now, it is Peter Pan content time, and I am racing. At the very end, I talk a little bit more about where this inspiration came from and some things that inspired me. So for now, I'm going to talk to you about my version of the character of Peter Pan and why I imagine him the way that I do. Through every version of Peter Pan that Barrie has put to paper, be it The Little White Bird, the play, and then eventually the book adaptation Peter and Wendy, his descriptions of the boy who would not grow up have always been vague. But I think it would be very foolish to expect such trivial descriptions as hair colour or eye colour from J.M. Barrie, particularly when it comes to a character so deeply fascinating and intricate as Peter Pan. In The Little White Bird, where we're first ever introduced to a very young Peter Pan, Barrie describes that he escaped from being a human when he was just 7 days old. Peter abandoned his human life and his family when he took flight from his very own nursery window. J.M. Barrie writes that all children were birds once, but they soon forget, and Peter believed he was a bird still, and so he could fly. He flew all the way to the Kensington Gardens, and there he met fairies. The fairies taught him things over time when they learnt to trust him, and he lived with the birds. But the problem was he wasn't quite bird, but he was certainly not human. He met the wise old Solomon, who said Peter is a part human, part bird. He described him as a betwixt and between, and if that doesn't suit the character, I don't know what else does. And so, betwixt and between, how could we describe this? Not human, not bird, somewhere in the middle. Now, Peter could fly without wings, and definitely did not have feathers. On that, Barrie was very certain, for Peter tried to ruffle his feathers to prove that he was a bird, but found he had none, and he was very disappointed. He did share a lot of bird traits though, a love of building nests and getting very good at it, and also looking at other people in a way that just wasn't quite human. The only other real descriptives we get of Peter Pan ever at any point are when Barrie describes him as still having all of his milk teeth, which are little pearls that he gnashes. He's also described as being dressed in such a way that he could ever be dressed, in autumn leaves and cobwebs. This is in the play version. When it was adapted into the novel, Peter and Wendy, he was described as wearing skeleton leaves and the juices that ooze out of trees. And that's it. The only other vague description we could potentially have is that Peter goes back to visit his mother once, and says that she has brown hair and is very pretty. This of course doesn't mean that Peter Pan has brown hair, and to be honest I don't think it really matters. And also, if he did once have brown hair, I doubt very highly that it is brown anymore. Now, armed with all of this information, how do I imagine Peter Pan? And why has it never changed since I was a child? There are so many different ways people interpret and imagine the character of Peter Pan. Hell, there are so many different ways people take and read the story. Me and my friend Kat argue over it all the time, and I love it. But it's amazing how one person's read of a situation can be completely different to another, even though they're given the same source material. As a child, I first experienced and came to know Peter Pan in 3 different ways. The first was a book and a tape. The tape would play the story of Peter Pan and I would read along with the book. Thankfully it wasn't too abridged, so I got most of the full story down even as a little kid. The second was, unfortunately, the Disney movie, which I did not care for. The third was actually seeing Peter Pan on stage, the play, a musical, and the ballet. I'd be hard-pressed to say which one I enjoyed the most. As an adult, I'd have to say the ballet probably, just because it's absolutely spectacular. As a child, they all hit me in different ways, but they all made me fall in love with the story and the character, and most importantly, want to be him. I connected with this character so much. I never wanted to be Wendy. I didn't want to be a lost boy. I didn't want to be Tinkerbell. I sort of wanted to be a pirate, but that's a different matter. I wanted to be Peter Pan, and I didn't want to settle for anything less. I got defensive over him, particularly when watching Hook as I got a little older, and the Disney movie. I pointed out everything that was wrong. I was very obnoxious. One day I'll do a character video about Wendy Darling and I'll go into it in more detail, but in brief, the reason I didn't like her character and really didn't want to be her was because she had everything I wanted, but she gave it up to come home. She came home to the human, mundane, boring world and gave up everything that I had ever wanted, which I never got a shot at. That just reaffirmed my belief that, well, I'm not a Wendy Darling, I'm not a lost boy, they grew up as well, I'm not a John and a Michael, I must be, and I am, a Peter Pan. I imagined him as this unearthly creature, human in vague form, but more spirit than anything else. I imagined he would fly through a window and drop to the floor with a scatter of glittering fairy dust. I imagined he would look around and the eyes he would see would just reflect the galaxy in them. I imagined he'd been blessed by the stars when he flew so close that he could touch them. I imagined he had starlight in his skin, in his eyes, and his fingers everywhere. When Peter leads Wendy, John, and Michael to the Neverland, 1,000,000 golden arrows were pointing out the island to them and directing them there. And I imagine this is what Peter is completely imbued with. Gold, sparkling rays of sunlight and starlight all melded into one. I thought he would be gold. Gold but silver, but brass, but all these different colours melded together. 1,000,000 golden arrows made into this shape that's sort of human but definitely not. Think of an oil spill that's been poured over burning sands. Those kind of colours merging together, the brassy tones and all the different ripples of colour. That's what I imagine Peter Pan looked like. In one of the final scenes of the play, when Hook and Peter are having their final battle, Barrie describes in the stage directions that Hook does not, especially in the most heated moments, quite see Peter, who to his eyes now blurred or opened clearly for the first time, is less like a boy than a mote of dust dancing in the sun. In this way then, Hook and I have a very similar view on Peter, except that Hook of course is seeing him in a moment of downfall, and he's almost afraid of him, whereas I see the mote of dust dancing in the sun as the perfect description of the ethereal, untouchable boy. And this, in all honesty, is the one thing that drives my constant defence of Peter Pan's character, and why I don't like it when it's changed. No matter which version you read, Peter Pan is always unearthly, ethereal, unattainable, and uncatchable. It's a core part of his being, his very existence, his character. It's why I see him the way that I do, this starlight become vaguely human-shaped in form, and I think to change that does him a disservice. Some people like to play up the romance aspect in movies, like the 2003 version. That movie was absolutely fine until they ricocheted in this weird Peter Pan wants to kiss Wendy and he does secretly love her, random weird stuff at the end. That's just not true to the original character. Number one, he's a boy. Number two, he doesn't understand any of those feelings and doesn't want to and never will be able to. But most importantly, we're not supposed to pity him for that. In a way, we're supposed to envy him. True as it may be, Peter will never have a family again. He will never experience all the things that humans will, and he will never grow up. But, as Barrie writes, he has ecstasies innumerable that other children can never, ever know. This, I imagine, is clear as day if you ever look at him. You catch glimpses of this starlight and sunlight, gold and colours, this ethereal, unearthly creature who looks human and could maybe pass as human if you were to squint or catch him out of the corner of your eye, but just is not, and never will be, and never wants to be ever again. And with that, the makeup look is pretty much done. I am going to go now and watch the movie Hook again, so that I can write a bunch of notes and try not to get too annoyed while I film the video for next week. I will leave you in the very capable hands of my past self, and I'm going to talk just a little bit more about some of the inspirations I had behind this makeup. I'd also encourage anyone who fancies it, have a look, dive deep into the lore and the history of Peter Pan, the story and the character. It's really interesting stuff. You don't have to go quite as deep and obsessively as I did, but it's really interesting if you fancy knowing more about his character. My preferred sources that I use are Peter Pan or The Boy Who Would Not Grow Up, the original play text, Peter and Wendy, the novelised version of the play, and The Little White Bird by J.M. Barrie. Alright, so this is me, finished, pretty much. I've done one hand but not the other because this hand needs to touch the phone and this hand is going to be used for some vague videos and very quick TikToks. I'm not going to do loads with this because I think it's pretty and I think it's fun, but I don't think it will get too much traction. So I decided to stick with my normal hair because the wigs just, they look too much like the other Peter Pan and I wasn't quite happy with them, so I've gone with just my hair. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with this, considering it is my first go with metallic stuff. I think it went pretty okay. So this is how I see Peter Pan. I never imagined him as this little ginger white kid, the sort of Disney version we all have. From when I was a kid and I was first read the story of Peter Pan, I saw this ethereal sort of spirit of youth, which is what Peter is. I imagined him in metallics with sort of brass and bronze and gold and silver all sort of intermingling through his skin, and starlight just everywhere, and glitter, so much glitter, which probably explains why I like glitter so much as an adult. I blame the circus for that. I blame my stint working in the circus for my love of glitter, but it's just, I'm a sparkly person. What can I say? I'm a weirdo goth child who is crazy obsessed with glitter and multicolored stuff, and hey, here I am. But I don't know why I did this video. Everything I love about the character is in this look, and it's just how I've always understood him. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the statue in Kensington Gardens, the statue that was commissioned to Peter Pan. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. I was lucky enough to see it when I was very, very young. Of course I was taken to see the statue of Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. Of course I was. I was obsessed with Peter Pan. Of course I was taken there. But it's so different seeing it in person because the colour is different. It's not just stone. It's not just this sort of marble sheen. It's everything I imagined. It is this sort of starlight become rock, become stone, become this beautiful, beautiful statue. I will try to find a picture and put it somewhere up here. That is the closest I've ever come to a picture of the Peter that I imagine. Now, I'm not saying that I am right, because I will always be beholden to Barrie's vision of this. It's such an important story in where Peter Pan comes from, and he's such an important part of my life. I do think that, you know, once he was created, he was given to the world, and everyone can see him very differently, but if I ever got a chance to, in some other lifetime, sit down with Jay and Barrie and just ask, there's so many things I would want to know, and how he imagined this boy is one of them. But this is how I see Peter Pan. This is probably one of my favourite looks I've ever done. Not because I think it's necessarily the best, not because I think anyone else will really care, but because I have got to see something that I have imagined in my head since I was a little kid. And the way I see it, if you have to grow up, which unfortunately all but one of us do, I feel like if the child you saw you now, if they wouldn't be delighted with at least some part of what you're doing, I don't know, I might mix things up a little bit, because I try to live sort of every day in a way that would make child me so happy. And hey, look where it's got me. I have jobs that I absolutely adore, that I got through my ability to create costumes, voice characters, and be a drama kid and perform. And the kid me would love that. I dress up and create costumes and cosplay and play pretend and act as some of the characters I have been acting and dressing up as since I was about 4 years old. This is amazing. Life is amazing. This is such a really positive, happy video. I have just realized that this video is almost getting obnoxiously positive. I don't care. Spreading some happy vibes because I can. So find your Neverland and do something awesome, because life is way too short, okay? Anyway, I'm gonna go and take pictures and film something as Peter Pan, my version. Have an amazing life. I will speak to you soon. Goodbye, Jellyspoons.